You don't hate yourself. Not really. You still have dreams. You still want more. You still feel that quiet pull toward a stronger life. But you don't respect yourself, and you feel it in the smallest moments, when you delay, when you fold, when you break your own standards and pretend it doesn't matter. Self-respect isn't a feeling. It's not confidence. It's not positivity. Self-respect is a verdict, the judgment your mind makes after watching how you live. And right now, your mind has watched you walk away from yourself too many times. That's why motivation doesn't last. Because motivation can't cover a lack of self-respect. When you don't respect yourself, every promise feels fake. Every plan feels temporary. Every new start feels like a lie you've told before. Here's the brutal truth. You cannot think your way back into self-respect. You cannot talk your way back into self-respect. You earn it, the way warriors earn steel, under pressure, in repetition, in silence. Self-respect is built when you do what you said you would do, especially when it's hard, especially when you're tired, especially when no one is watching. That's when the mind starts believing, this man is real. This man follows through. And the reason you feel weak is not because you lack potential. It's because you lack evidence. Evidence that your word means something. Evidence that your standards are real. Evidence that you can be trusted with your own future. So rebuilding self-respect doesn't start with big goals. It starts with small laws, micro-promises you keep until your identity shifts, until your word becomes weight, until your standards become spine. In Chapter 2, we expose the real collapse, how self-respect dies, how it makes you numb and hesitant, and why rebuilding it is the first step to rebuilding your entire life. Self-respect doesn't die in one day. It doesn't die with a single failure. It dies in the small betrayals, the moments that seem harmless until they stack into a verdict. You don't notice it at first. You miss one promise. You break one standard. You take one shortcut, and you tell yourself, it's fine. But your mind doesn't hear the excuse. It hears the pattern. It watches what you tolerate. It watches what you allow. And every time you let yourself slide, your mind quietly concludes, this man cannot be trusted. That conclusion becomes a weight. You start delaying things you used to do automatically. You start negotiating with actions that should be law. You start needing emotion to do what should be routine. And the worst part? You begin defending it. You call it rest. You call it balance. You call it taking it easy. But deep down, you know you're avoiding the work because facing it would expose how far you've fallen. This is how self-respect collapses, not through external defeat, through internal permission. Permission to skip, permission to quit early, permission to lower standards so you don't feel the sting of your own inconsistency. You don't become weak because life hits you. You become weak because you keep choosing comfort over your own word. And that choice changes your posture. It changes your eyes. It changes your presence. A man with self-respect walks like he belongs in his own body. A man without it walks like he's borrowing his life. You can feel it when you enter a room and your energy feels thin, not because people are judging you, but because you are. Self-respect is internal authority. It's the part of you that says, I do what I said I would do. When that authority collapses, everything else becomes unstable. You start looking for shortcuts. You start chasing quick fixes. You start wanting results without the repetition. Because you don't want to rebuild. You want to escape the feeling of not respecting yourself. But escape doesn't restore self-respect. It numbs the pain, and numbness becomes your new normal. You stop feeling proud. You stop feeling sharp. You stop feeling hunger. Not because you're calm, because you're disconnected. Disconnected from standards, disconnected from identity, disconnected from the version of you that used to feel alive. And then something even worse happens. You stop making promises, not because you've become wise, but because you're afraid. Afraid of proving again that your word has no weight. Afraid of disappointing yourself. Afraid of hearing that quiet voice inside your chest say, here we go again. This is the dead zone, where you still exist, but you don't fully live. You wake up. You work. You scroll. You sleep. And you pretend you're okay. But in the quiet moments, you feel it. The sense that your life is on pause because you don't trust yourself to press play. Here is the brutal truth, though. Self-respect isn't lost forever. It is not destroyed. It is paused until you provide proof again. Because the mind is fair. It doesn't ask you to be perfect. It asks you to be consistent. One kept promise won't fix years of betrayal. But it starts the reversal. It tells your mind, something has changed. It tells your identity, we're not sliding today. It tells your spirit, we're standing again. And this is why rebuilding must start small, because the man you are today cannot hold massive standards yet. So you begin with micro-laws, small commitments you refuse to negotiate, not to impress anyone, to rebuild internal authority. Authority is self-respect. In Chapter 3, we go to the root truth, why you keep betraying yourself, what psychological mechanism keeps you stuck, and how micro-promises turn into a new identity that cannot be shaken. If you want to rebuild self-respect, you must face the root truth, not the surface excuses, not "I'm busy," not "I'm tired," not "I lost motivation." The real reason you keep breaking your promises is that your current identity benefits from staying the same. Your old self doesn't want growth. It wants safety. It wants predictability. It wants comfort that never challenges you. So every time you decide to rise, your old identity pulls you back, not with force but with persuasion. A soft voice, a reasonable excuse, a delay that feels harmless. And the problem is, you've listened to that voice for so long that it sounds like you. You call it realistic. You call it being smart. You call it protecting your energy. But underneath it all is fear. Fear of discomfort. Fear of failure. Fear of proving you can't do it. Fear of becoming responsible for your own life. Self-respect demands responsibility. And responsibility is heavy. A man with self-respect cannot blame the world. He cannot hide behind moods. He cannot disappear into comfort and still call himself strong. So the weaker self fights self-respect, because self-respect would end the comfortable lies. Here is what you must understand. Every time you break a promise, you are choosing an identity. You're choosing the identity of, I don't follow through. I am negotiable. My standards are flexible. My word doesn't matter. And the more you choose it, the more natural it becomes. Not because it's true, because it's practiced. This is why self-respect doesn't return through thinking. It returns through proof. Your mind needs evidence that a new identity exists. Without evidence, self-respect is impossible. You can't respect a man who only speaks. You respect a man who does what he says. But the evidence must be believable. If you promise too much, your mind already knows you will fail. And failing again deepens the shame. So rebuilding begins with a promise so small your weaker self has no excuse to refuse it. This is not lowering standards. This is rebuilding foundation. There is a moment when the first micro-promise is kept and the mind goes quiet. Not excited. Quiet. Because the mind is watching. It's waiting to see if this is another performance or the start of something real. When you keep it again the next day, your mind starts to shift. Not dramatically, but internally. This is what most men never do. They never stay long enough for identity to change. They try for 3 days. They stop. They call themselves weak. They retreat. But identity is not changed in 3 days. Identity is changed when the evidence becomes undeniable. You rebuild self-respect when you build an unbroken chain, not a chain of perfect days, a chain of followed-through actions that prove your word has weight again. Every link matters. Every link strengthens you. Because every link is a message. I didn't betray myself today. And slowly, the shame lifts. Not because you forgive yourself, but because you stop repeating the behavior that made you ashamed. Self-respect does not come from comfort. Self-respect comes from correction, from living differently. This is why the root truth matters. You don't need a new life first. You need a new identity first. An identity built on non-negotiable micro-laws. An identity built on proof. An identity built in silence. This is where rebuilding becomes possible. In Chapter 4, I'll give you the framework. 3 principles that rebuild self-respect without relying on emotion and without collapsing under pressure. This is the system that turns promises into spine. If self-respect collapsed because your word became light, then self-respect returns when your word becomes law again. Not a feeling, a structure. And the structure is built on 3 principles, simple enough to remember, brutal enough to work. The first principle: make micro-laws, not big dreams. Most men rebuild the wrong way. They write huge goals to feel powerful for one night, then collapse for the next 30 days. A dream is emotional. A law is behavioral. A micro-law is a commitment so small you can't hide from it, so clear you can't interpret it, so repeatable you can't outrun it. 1 set, 1 page, 1 walk, 1 cold minute, 1 hour without the poison habit. Small enough to do, large enough to change you. The point isn't the size. The point is the consistency. Self-respect is not built by what you plan. It is built by what you repeat, and repetition is how the mind decides, this man is real. The second principle: remove negotiation completely. Self-respect dies when your standards become debates. If you wake up each day and ask your feelings for permission, your feelings will deny you. A man with self-respect does not ask, do I feel like it? He asks, what do I do now? He executes. Then emotion adjusts. This is not coldness. This is leadership, internal leadership. Negotiation is the doorway through which weakness enters. When you remove it, action becomes inevitable. And inevitability is the soil where self-respect grows. The third principle: stack proof until your mind believes you. Self-respect is evidence-based. Your mind does not respect words. It respects patterns. It respects follow-through. It respects proof. Every time you keep a promise, you deposit proof. Every time you break a promise, you withdraw trust. Right now, most men live in debt. They want self-respect without proof. But proof is the only currency self-respect accepts. This is why you must stack it. 1 day, then another, then another. No drama, no announcement, no performance, just proof. Because eventually your mind stops questioning you. It stops saying, will you quit? It starts saying, this is who you are now. This is the identity shift. The moment the chain becomes heavy. The moment your standard becomes normal. The moment you stop needing emotion to do what you said. And when that happens, self-respect returns naturally, like pressure returning to a sealed container. These 3 principles work together. Micro-laws create consistency. No negotiation creates inevitability. Proof creates identity. Obey them long enough and your self-respect will rise even if your confidence doesn't. Because confidence is optional. Self-respect is structural. And once self-respect returns, everything else changes. You speak less, but your words carry weight. You move slower, but your actions are decisive. You feel emotion, but you don't obey it. You become harder to manipulate because you are no longer negotiating with your own weakness. This is what rebuilding actually is. Not becoming perfect, but becoming reliable. A reliable man is respected by his own mind, and a man respected by his own mind cannot be easily broken. In Chapter 5, I will show you what this looks like in real situations, where pressure is high, where temptation is loud, where your standards are tested in the middle of chaos. That's where self-respect becomes real. Because real self-respect is not what you feel in quiet rooms. It's what you keep when the world is burning. Self-respect becomes real only when pressure is real. It's easy to feel strong in a quiet room with a clean plan and no resistance. But the world doesn't test you in quiet rooms. It tests you when you're tired, when you're tempted, when you're stressed, when the old habits feel familiar. That's where self-respect is decided. Let's talk about temptation. When self-respect is low, temptation feels like relief. Scrolling, overeating, numbing habits, avoidance. Not because you love them, because you've been using them to avoid the feeling of not trusting yourself. So every time you relapse, it's not the habit that hurts most. It's the confirmation. I can't rely on me. Now watch what happens when micro-laws are in place. You don't try to become perfect. You simply refuse one negotiation, one choice, one small refusal, one small follow-through. And your mind feels it immediately. Not happiness, authority. Authority is the first taste of rebuilt self-respect. Here's an example. A man wants to stop a destructive habit. He promises he'll quit forever. He fails. He feels shame. He quits trying. The rebuild is different. He creates one micro law. I don't do it before noon. Or, I go one day clean. Or, when the urge hits, I do 10 push-ups first. Small, repeatable, non-negotiable. And the moment he keeps it, he earns proof. Proof doesn't remove temptation. It removes helplessness. Another example, discipline under fatigue. Most men break their word when they're tired, because tiredness makes weakness sound logical. I'll do it tomorrow. I deserve rest. Today was hard. Listen, rest is real, but excuses hide inside it. Self-respect is not built by training only when you feel good. It's built when you show up in a reduced form and still do something. Not heroic, reliable. A micro law for fatigue might be, even if I do less, I do something. One set, one page, one clean action. This is not lowering standards. It is refusing collapse. And refusing collapse is what makes a man respectable to his own mind. Now look at confrontation. A man with no self-respect avoids uncomfortable truth. He stays quiet when he should speak. He agrees when he should refuse. He smiles when he should stand firm. And later he feels the poison, that quiet self-disgust, because he abandoned his standard for approval or peace. Self-respect returns when you stop betraying truth. You don't have to be loud. You just have to be solid. A micro law for confrontation is simple. I don't lie to keep comfort. Or, I speak one honest sentence. Or, I don't apologize for having a boundary. One honest sentence can rebuild more self-respect than 1,000 silent compromises. Now look at work and ambition. Low self-respect creates procrastination. Because procrastination is not time management, it's fear management. Fear of proving you're not enough. Fear of starting and failing. Fear of your own potential being tested. So you delay, you distract, you run. Self-respect returns when you stop running. One focused block, one finished task, one clean completion. Completion is identity fuel. This is why finishing matters. A man who finishes becomes a man who trusts himself. A man who trusts himself becomes a man who respects himself. And self-respect becomes the base for every higher achievement. Not motivation, not hype. Self-respect. The world will not clap for this. Most people won't even notice, but you will notice the way your mind goes quiet after you follow through. That quiet is not emptiness. It is the absence of self-betrayal. And it feels like peace because it is clean. So understand this. Self-respect is not rebuilt by big victories. It's rebuilt by small decisions made correctly under pressure. Small laws. No negotiation. Proof stacked daily. In Chapter 6, I'll show you how to apply this as a daily system. A simple routine that keeps self-respect growing even when life becomes chaotic. This is where your rebuild becomes permanent. If you want self-respect to return, you need a daily system. Not a mood, not a speech, not a burst of discipline. A system that works when life is loud, when stress is high, when motivation is absent. Because the rebuild is not emotional, it is mechanical. Here is the system. Step 1. One morning micro law. Your morning is your identity gate. If you win the first small battle, your mind enters the day with authority. Choose one action that happens before everything else. A glass of water. 1 minute of silence. 10 push-ups. A short walk. A cold rinse. 1 page of reading. Not to impress anyone. To tell your mind, I lead this body. Step 2. 1 midday proof action. Self-respect is fragile in the middle of the day when fatigue builds and distraction becomes attractive. So you place one proof action in the center of the day, a small commitment that cannot be ignored, a focused work block, a clean completion, a training set, one hard task you've been avoiding. This is where you prove you don't only start strong, you sustain. Step 3. One evening, closure. Most men lose self-respect at night. They promise themselves they'll end the day clean, then they leak. So you create an evening closure law, something that signals, I finish correctly. A short review, a journal line, 5 minutes of stretching, a device cutoff, a clean room reset, a simple plan for tomorrow. Closure builds trust because it proves you complete. Now listen carefully. This system is not about doing a lot. It is about doing 3 things with no negotiation, 3 anchors, 3 proof points, 3 laws. When you hit all 3, your mind goes quiet, because it can no longer argue that you are unreliable. Step 4. Reduce the promise, never break it. When life hits hard, your system must survive, so on bad days you shrink, but you don't skip. If 10 push-ups is too much, do 1. If a work block is too heavy, do 5 minutes. If your closure routine is difficult, do the smallest version. This is how self-respect is protected, by making failure impossible without making standards optional. Step 5. The never twice rule. Missing once is life. Missing twice is identity damage. Twice becomes a pattern. Twice becomes permission. Twice becomes the old self returning. So you live by one rule: never miss twice. If you fail today, tomorrow you restore the chain immediately. This rule alone saves more men than motivation ever will. Step 6. Remove retreat habits. Your system will not hold if you keep feeding your escapes. Scrolling, numbing, endless entertainment, overeating, late-night poison habits. These behaviors teach your mind that discomfort equals retreat. Replace them with actions that keep you present. Walking, breathing, training, writing, clean work. Presence is where self-respect grows. Step 7. Upgrade only after 14 days. Most men upgrade too early because they want to feel powerful, but self-respect isn't built by feeling powerful. It's built by being consistent. So you run the same micro-laws for 14 days straight before you add anything. 14 days is long enough for the mind to recognize pattern. Long enough for trust to start forming. Long enough for your identity to begin shifting. Step 8. Stack silent proof. Don't post it, don't announce it, don't seek applause. Proof becomes stronger when it is private. A man who can keep promises without witnesses builds the highest form of self-respect, because his standards are not dependent on the world, and after weeks of this you will feel it. Less negotiation, more action. Less shame, more clarity. Less emotion driving you, more authority inside you. Self-respect returning is not dramatic. It is stable, and once it stabilizes, everything else rises with it. Discipline becomes easier, confidence becomes natural, boundaries become firm, work becomes focused, because your mind finally believes, this man follows through. In Chapter 7, you will enter the closing silence, the moment self-respect becomes weight and you stop needing anyone else to feel whole. That silence is the reward for a clean life. There is a silence that comes only after you stop lying to yourself. Not a dramatic silence, not a cinematic ending. A clean silence, the kind you feel when you kept your word and nothing inside you needs to argue. That silence is self-respect returning. Because self-respect is not excitement, it is inner order. It is the calm that appears when your actions match your standards. You don't feel high, you feel aligned. For a long time you lived with internal noise, plans you didn't follow, standards you didn't keep, promises you broke, small betrayals you dismissed. That noise was not stress, it was guilt. Guilt is the sound of a man living beneath his code, and the moment you begin rebuilding, the noise starts to fade. Not because life gets easier, but because you stop creating new reasons to feel ashamed. You stop adding fresh evidence against yourself. Self-respect grows when shame stops being fed. You will notice the change in small moments. When you wake up and there's no debate. When you do the work and don't need motivation. When you refuse a temptation and don't feel deprived. Because you're not being deprived. You're being reclaimed. A man without self-respect is always bargaining. He bargains with time. He bargains with standards. He bargains with truth. A man with self-respect doesn't bargain. He decides. Decision is dignity, and once dignity returns, your life sharpens. You stop tolerating chaos. You stop living half clean. You stop accepting weak patterns as normal, not because you hate yourself, but because you finally respect yourself enough to demand better. This is what most people misunderstand. Self-respect is not arrogance. It is not ego. It is not superiority. It is simply a man living in a way that his mind can stand behind. When your mind stands behind you, you feel stronger without trying to feel strong. You become harder to break because you no longer break yourself. You become calmer because you no longer live divided. You become more dangerous because your decisions carry weight and your standards don't collapse under pressure. And the best part? No one can take this from you. Money can be lost. Status can be lost. Relationships can shift. But self-respect earned through proof is anchored inside you. It stays. It travels with you. So if you want a new life, stop chasing big emotions. Chase clean proof. One micro law in the morning. One proof action in the day. One closure at night. Repeat it until your identity shifts. This is how self-respect is rebuilt. Quietly. Daily. Without witnesses. Stand in that silence for a moment. Feel the weight returning. Feel the order returning. Feel the man inside you becoming solid again. That is the real rebuild. Pain is the forge. Self-respect is the blade. And silence is the sharpening stone. We rebuild in silence.